I was a backup dancer on Taylor Swift's tour, but there's something that happened backstage that I've never been able to forget. It's something I shouldn't even be telling you, but I can't keep it inside anymore. The things we were forced to do, what Taylor herself demanded, still haunt me. I didn't realize what I was getting into, but by the time I did, it was too late. There are secrets behind the glittering lights, things no one talks about. And now, I have to tell you, because maybe, just maybe, you need to know what really happened. It all started when I arrived on tour. I was one of the backup dancers on Taylor Swift's tour. Yeah, it sounds like a dream come true. It was once mine, too. The call came, and suddenly you're part of something huge. You imagine the flashing lights, the screams, the crowds adoring you, the world at your feet. But soon, something didn't feel right. At first, it was small things, little signs that made me uneasy, but I brushed them off. It's Taylor Swift. Who was I to question anything? She was perfect, and I was lucky just to be there. But over time, I realized I was just there to fill space, replaceable. The pressure started slowly, building with rehearsals. Every move had to be flawless. Perfection wasn't just expected in dancing, it was everything. No mistakes, no weaknesses. And it wasn't said out loud, but there was this unspoken rule. If you weren't perfect, you were out. But that wasn't the worst part. One night after a show, we were all called into the back room. Taylor was there, cold, distant, her eyes unfocused. She said we needed to bond more. At the time, I didn't get it, but we all went along with it. Then, she told us to open up. Something in my gut screamed, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was overthinking it. It wasn't paranoia. Taylor started making strange requests, things that had nothing to do with the tour. Late night rehearsals turned into rituals under the guise of team building. But it wasn't about teamwork. It was about giving ourselves to her. We did what she asked, afraid of what might happen if we didn't. Fear kept us quiet. Fear kept us compliant. But that wasn't the worst of it. If you crossed her, if you dared to challenge her, you were done. Your career, your future, gone. The dancers started to withdraw, retreating into themselves like they were trying to escape something, but they couldn't. I tried to ask, but no one would answer. Nervous looks and quick subject changes. It was like a code, something you weren't supposed to break. Then I saw it. Taylor's eyes, cold, empty, like she wasn't seeing us at all. That's when it hit me. It wasn't about dance anymore. We were just tools, her tools. I didn't know how to escape. I didn't know who to talk to. But the worst part, I couldn't leave. I was trapped. There was nowhere to go and no one to turn to. My mind raced. How had I gotten here? How had it gone so wrong? I tried to find a way out, but every path I took only led me deeper into the web she had woven. There was no way to escape, no way to break free. And as the darkness closed in, I realized the only way out might be to become exactly what she wanted. One of her tools. The door creaked as I stepped into the back room, the air thick with the smell of fresh pine and faint traces of perfume. For a split second, it felt like any other rehearsal space, just a room filled with anticipation, the buzz of excitement humming in the walls. The room was immaculate, too perfect almost. White walls gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the polished wood floor gleamed as though no one had ever touched it. There were mirrors on every side, reflecting my every movement. I glanced at my reflection, seeing the nervous smile I wore as I made my way deeper into the room. But, for all its perfection, something felt wrong. The room was too quiet, too still. I tried to ignore the heaviness in the air. I kept my shoulders relaxed, walked with confidence like I was supposed to, but something made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was the way the lights buzzed, not in a comforting, steady hum, but in a sharp, almost electric way, like they were trying to keep something in the shadows. Something hidden. To my left, a row of props sat neatly along the walls, things I'd seen from the stage. The large, colorful umbrellas, the strange, oversized chairs we'd use for certain acts. But in this light, they looked out of place, unnaturally sharp edges, too polished, too new. Like they'd never seen a performance, like they were waiting for something. Waiting for us. I paused by the windows, big, tall ones that let in the light. But the view outside was nothing but darkness. The sky had already swallowed the sun, leaving only a deep blue-black expanse that felt too empty. No stars, no noise, nothing. Just quiet. I forced myself to look away. The window felt like a barrier, a thin film between what was happening out here and what was happening inside. It wasn't like the calm of being backstage before a show. It was as if the air had thickened, pressurized. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, unsure whether to sit down or keep moving. My heart beat a little faster than usual, but I convinced myself it was just nerves. It had to be nerves. The other dancers hadn't arrived yet, so the space felt even bigger than it should have been. The emptiness in the room spread around me, the silence making every sound feel louder than it was. The slight scrape of my sneakers against the floor echoed, unnaturally sharp, filling the space. I walked further into the center, avoiding the mirrors. It felt like they were too close, as though they were watching me, waiting for me to break. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, and then stilled, leaving only that slight hum behind. I could hear the distant murmur of the crew setting up elsewhere in the building, but it felt so far away, so disconnected. The door at the far end of the room swung open, and a figure stepped inside. The sudden movement broke the stillness, and I flinched, quickly turning my head, only to find it was just one of the stagehands, a familiar face, but someone I had never really spoken to. He nodded at me with a smile that seemed just a little too forced. "Just waiting for the others," he said, his voice breaking the silence like a sudden crack in glass. But the moment he spoke, it was like everything shifted. The room felt colder, the space more confined. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, longer. There was no obvious change, but I felt it, like the walls were closing in. I nodded back, forcing a smile, though the gesture felt hollow. He turned to leave, and for a brief moment, I watched him, his footsteps quick and purposeful. But then something made me glance back at the door he'd just closed behind him. It wasn't the door. It was the shadows that pooled just beyond it, flickering oddly, like they were moving of their own accord. I blinked, trying to shake the feeling, but when I looked again, the shadows were still there, swirling slightly as though they were breathing. "Stop," I scolded myself, taking another slow breath. It was nothing, just nerves. But as I exhaled, a soft sound, faint, like the rustling of fabric, came from the far side of the room. I froze, It wasn't loud enough to be footsteps, but it was enough to send a shiver running down my spine. I turned slowly, my eyes darting to the corner of the room where I thought I'd heard it. Nothing. Just a pile of unused props, some chairs stacked in neat rows. The rustling stopped, but the feeling didn't. I couldn't explain it, but the air had shifted. Everything felt heavier, like the space I was in had absorbed some kind of pressure that wasn't there before. I looked at the walls, the mirrors again, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was this unsettling sense that something, somewhere, was out of place. A small part of me wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to. I was here to dance, to perform. This was my dream, wasn't it? So why was I feeling this way? Why was every sound, every movement sending little jolts of fear through me? The door opened again, and this time, more dancers filed in. They were laughing, chatting, their energy light. But as they entered, they seemed to absorb the silence, the heaviness. They quieted, almost instantly. I saw their eyes scan the room, the same hesitation I'd felt just moments before. No one said anything, but we all knew. The lights flickered again, just once, but this time no one moved. There was an odd silence, broken only by the distant hum of music from down the hall. But it felt wrong, out of place, like we weren't supposed to be here, like this room wasn't meant for us. And that's when I realized we weren't supposed to be here. It wasn't just the room that was off. It was the whole tour. And just when I thought I could shake off the creeping unease, something I couldn't explain hit me. It was a cold gust of air, but it wasn't from a draft. It felt deliberate, like someone had just opened a door that wasn't there. I should have walked away then, but I didn't. I stayed. And what happened next? That's when everything truly began to unravel. I don't know when exactly it happened, but something started to feel wrong that day. I couldn't put my finger on it, not at first. It was small things, things you dismiss if you weren't paying attention. But that's the thing about unease, isn't it? It creeps in slowly in the little things until you can't ignore it anymore. The room was filling up, and the other dancers were laughing, exchanging stories, their energy light. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt like an outsider looking in. It wasn't the rehearsal, or the waiting, or even the anticipation. It was the strange heaviness in the air, like something invisible had settled over the room. I turned to look at the door. It had closed behind us the moment we walked in, but there was something about it now that felt off. The way it sat in the frame, too still, almost like it wasn't part of the room at all. It wasn't until I noticed the lock half hidden behind the door frame that the unease shifted into something more. I don't know why I noticed it then, but I did. A small black lock, but it wasn't locked. No, that wasn't it. It was the way it was left ajar, as though someone had just forgotten to latch it completely. A lock that wasn't quite locked. I felt my throat tighten and I looked away quickly, trying to shake off the feeling. There was no reason to feel anxious, right? Just another day of rehearsal. But the thought of that lock nagged at me. Then, there was him. A guest had entered. I didn't know who he was, but he had the kind of face that made you pay attention. He stood in the corner, talking to one of the crew members, his eyes darting around the room, taking in everything like it was part of his job to watch. He wasn't one of the dancers, not one of the staff. He just stood there. He didn't belong. He caught my gaze for a moment. Just a brief second. A quick, unsettling glance. Not a smile, not a nod, just a look. It wasn't an invitation to interact. It was a challenge. His eyes seemed too cold, too calculating, like he was measuring something inside me that I wasn't even aware of. I felt a strange shiver race down my spine, and I quickly looked away, focusing on the other dancers. But the look lingered, hanging in the air, making everything else feel distant, disconnected. As I shifted uncomfortably, I caught Taylor in the corner of my eye. She was speaking to someone, but I wasn't sure who. I couldn't hear the conversation. There was too much noise, too many people, but what caught my attention was her expression. She wasn't smiling, not in the way you'd expect a star to smile when surrounded by people. No, her face was hard, unreadable, cold. She had always been professional, but this was different. Her eyes were empty, distant. She wasn't looking at the person she was speaking to, but somewhere else entirely, as though her thoughts were miles away, in a place none of us were allowed to be. She caught me looking at her, and for a split second, I thought I saw her eyes flicker with something dark, something that felt dangerous. It didn't last long. The moment was gone before I could even register it, replaced by her usual serene mask. But I couldn't shake the unease that settled deeper in my chest. I tried to push the thought aside. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was just exhausted. It had been a long week. I could feel the strain in my muscles, the burn from pushing myself to be perfect. We all had. But then, I saw it again. The flicker. The thing that had been gnawing at me since I entered the room. The lights. They flickered just once, above the mirrors. The kind of flicker that you'd think was just a glitch. But when it happened again, I couldn't ignore it. They weren't the old, flickering lights you might see in an abandoned building. These were modern, new lights. The kind that are supposed to work flawlessly. And yet, there it was. The light flickered again. I froze. I watched the way the light seemed to stutter before coming back on fully. It wasn't a power surge, or at least, it didn't seem like it. It was as if the room was trying to tell me something and I didn't know what to do with it. But then, it was gone. The lights were fine again, but the air in the room had changed. The tension had thickened, and I could feel it pressing against my chest. Someone spoke to me from behind. I didn't recognize the voice immediately, but I turned around and saw one of the dancers. She had her eyes cast down, her arms crossed. She wasn't smiling, and there was something in her posture that felt closed off. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered, her voice so quiet I barely heard it over the others. I blinked, unsure how to respond. She hadn't looked at me, but I could feel her eyes on me as if she was waiting for something. I didn't have time to answer her, though. The crew had gathered near the center, talking in hushed voices. Their conversation didn't seem urgent, but their body language told me something was wrong. Their movements were stiff, almost mechanical, like they were waiting for something. And it wasn't until I looked closer at their faces that I saw it, the unease in their eyes. They were all too aware. I couldn't help myself. I needed to know what was going on, so I made my way closer to the group. I was about to open my mouth to ask when Taylor's voice sliced through the chatter, cold and commanding. "No one leaves until I say so." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. There was something in the way she said it that made every person in the room stiffen. She wasn't talking about the show. She wasn't talking about choreography. She wasn't even talking about the rehearsal. No, this was different. This felt ominous, like we had crossed a line and didn't even know it. I felt my body tense, a deep, gut-wrenching discomfort spreading through me, but I held my ground. Taylor wasn't looking at any of us. She wasn't even looking at the group she was speaking to. She was staring straight ahead, her face locked in that same cold, distant expression I had seen earlier. And then, in a way I couldn't explain, I realized I wasn't the only one who felt it. The room had fallen quiet, so quiet I could hear the slight hum of the air conditioning, the rustling of clothing, the occasional cough. It was as if everyone in that room had been waiting for something unspoken, something we all feared but couldn't name. I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't know what had changed or when exactly it started, but the way the air felt, the way the lights flickered, the way Taylor looked, everything had shifted. And something told me this was only the beginning. The tension in the room had been growing, thickening like smoke, and I could feel it pressing in on me. It had started small, the flickers of the lights, the unease in the air, but now everything was different. I could feel it in my bones, in the very pit of my stomach. Something was terribly wrong, and I could no longer ignore it. I thought it was just nerves, maybe the exhaustion from rehearsals catching up with me. But as the day wore on, that initial discomfort began to evolve into something deeper, something far more sinister. I had just finished another run-through, and the rest of the dancers were milling around, talking in hushed voices, barely glancing at each other. There was no laughter now. The usual easy camaraderie had vanished, replaced by this strange, almost oppressive silence. They moved like automatons, mechanically, as if they were just going through the motions without really being there. And that was when it hit me. The sense of isolation. The sense that we were all just pieces in some twisted game, and none of us knew the rules. I wanted to speak to someone, ask if they felt it too, but I couldn't bring myself to. Every time I tried, the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood there, watching, waiting for the unease to pass. But it didn't. It only grew stronger. The door to the rehearsal space creaked open, and in walked the guest, the same man from earlier. He didn't look at me this time. His gaze was focused ahead, and his footsteps echoed louder than they should have. The room seemed to fall silent in response to his presence. The air around us grew colder, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He moved to the far side of the room where the crew was gathered. They parted for him, and I saw the way they looked at him. There was something in their eyes, fear maybe, or reverence. I couldn't tell, but I didn't need to. I knew something was wrong. Taylor was standing across the room, her back to us, but I could see her reflection in the mirrors. She hadn't spoken in what felt like hours, her face frozen in that same distant, empty expression. She wasn't looking at anyone, but she was still aware of everything around her. I could feel it. The tension between her and the rest of the room was palpable. She had become a force, a presence that seemed to consume everything in its path. The moment I locked eyes with her reflection, she turned her head slightly, just enough for me to catch her gaze in the mirror. There was no warmth there, no acknowledgement of the people around her, no recognition, only coldness, a blank stare that chilled me to the bone. I turned away, my breath hitching in my chest, trying to ignore the growing knot of dread inside me. But then it happened. There was a sound. Soft at first, just a faint, almost imperceptible noise, but it quickly grew louder, more distinct. A scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across the floor. I thought it was coming from behind me, but when I spun around, the space was empty. No one was there. I blinked, confused. I hadn't heard it just once. Number. It was a series of scratches, sharp and rhythmic, like something was trying to claw its way out from underneath the floorboards. My heart began to pound, my chest tightening with each passing second. But when I looked again, the floor was still. No marks, no movement, nothing. I tried to tell myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, a figment of my exhausted imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew it couldn't be. My gaze flicked back to the door. The same door with the partially unlocked lock. And that's when I saw it. The door wasn't just ajar. It was slowly swinging open on its own. No one had touched it, and yet the hinges creaked, protesting the sudden movement. My breath caught in my throat. I should have moved. Should have gone over to close it, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, watching as the door opened wider, inch by inch, as though something invisible was pulling it. No one else seemed to notice. They were too caught up in their own conversations, their own thoughts, too wrapped up in their routines. They couldn't see what I saw, but I saw it. And it was real. I glanced toward Taylor, hoping to find some explanation, some sign that she knew something was wrong, but she was staring straight ahead, her eyes glazed over. She wasn't even looking at the door. She wasn't looking at anything. It was like she was trapped in a different reality, and I couldn't reach her. I felt the temperature drop, a sudden chill spreading through the room. It was more than just the air conditioning. It was a coldness that seemed to seep into my bones, settling like ice in my chest. I hugged my arms tighter around myself, but it didn't help. It didn't ease the fear creeping up my spine. I forced myself to take a step forward toward the door, but the moment I did, a loud bang echoed through the space. A crash that made everyone jump. I turned toward the noise, heart racing. It came from behind the stage, from the dark, cluttered corner where the props were stored. I didn't want to go toward it. I didn't want to see what caused the sound, but my body moved on its own, pulling me in that direction. And that's when I saw it. A figure in the shadows, a tall shape, standing perfectly still, staring at me. I could see nothing but the outline, the vague shape of something that didn't belong. A cold, creeping dread wrapped around my throat, choking out any thoughts I had left. My feet moved, but I couldn't look away. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I should have screamed, should have run, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. And just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing there alone, with nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing filling the silence. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone for a long time. But it wasn't until that moment when the figure disappeared, when the door swung open of its own accord, that I realized the truth. This wasn't just a tour. This wasn't just a job. It was something much darker, something much more dangerous. And now, I had no way of getting out. It wasn't until that moment that I fully realized I was losing myself. I had felt the unease building for days, a slow burning tension that twisted in my gut, making everything feel wrong. But this moment was different. It wasn't just the shadows in the corners or the flickering lights anymore. It was me. I'd been walking down the narrow corridor backstage, the same one I'd taken 1,000 times, the familiar squeak of my sneakers on the polished floor echoing in the silence. But tonight, it was different. The hallway stretched out longer than it should have, the walls closing in. The sound of my footsteps seemed muffled, distant, like I wasn't even there. I paused, feeling the weight of the air pressing down on me, thick and heavy. I shouldn't have stopped. I shouldn't have stood there in that one spot, feeling the cold crawl up my spine. But I did. It was like my body wasn't in control anymore. I wasn't alone. I knew that. But I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I couldn't bring myself to face what I was already starting to sense, deep in my bones. I had to ignore it. I had to pretend that everything was fine. And then I heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, just the slightest brush of sound against the stillness. It wasn't clear, but it was there, calling my name. Not the way you hear someone calling from down the hall, but inside my mind. I flinched, spinning on my heel, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, dead silent like it always was. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, but the sound lingered. Not the whisper itself, but the feeling. The unmistakable sensation that I was being watched. My heart thudded in my chest, harder now, the coldness in the air growing, wrapping around me like a vice. I tried to move forward, but my feet felt like they were stuck, like the floor was suddenly pulling me down. I forced myself to take a step, then another, but my legs felt heavy, unwilling. It was as though the very air had thickened, refusing to let me go. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to run. No escape from the feeling creeping over me like a shadow that would never lift. Then it happened. The sound, but not in my head this time. No, it was real. A door, somewhere down the hall, slammed. The force of it rattled the walls, and I could feel the vibration deep in my chest. The kind of sound that makes your heart leap into your throat. My body went rigid, instinctively pulling me towards the noise, despite every fiber of my being telling me to turn around and get out. I walked slowly, each step feeling like an eternity. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly now, the lights flickering overhead as if they were struggling to stay on. I felt my breath quicken, every step sounding louder in my ears, but when I reached the door, it was ajar. Just slightly, but enough for me to see that it led into a small, unlit room. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the door as though it were some kind of omen, warning me not to step forward. But I didn't have a choice. I couldn't stop myself anymore. The door creaked open, groaning under my touch, and I stepped inside. The room was pitch black, except for the faint light spilling in from the hallway, barely enough to make out the faint outline of the furniture. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, facing the far wall. But it wasn't the chair that caught my attention. It was the mirror. The tall, full-length mirror standing in the corner of the room, its surface reflecting nothing but darkness. And there was someone, standing in the reflection. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, the dark shadows in the room distorting what I was seeing. But no, there was something in the mirror. It was me, or at least, it looked like me. The figure in the reflection didn't move, it didn't blink. It just stood there, staring back at me with a vacant, hollow expression. The me in the mirror looked different. It was my face, but it wasn't me. The eyes, the expression, it was like a twisted version of myself, empty and lifeless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My legs were frozen, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. And then, it happened. The figure in the reflection smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was sharp, unnatural. A grin that spread too wide, far too wide. The kind of smile that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. My heart slammed in my chest and I backed away, but the figure didn't stop smiling. It just kept staring, its eyes following my every movement. "You can't escape," it whispered. Its voice a distorted, hollow version of my own. The words rang in my ears, echoing in my mind. I spun around, feeling the blood drain from my face. The room had changed. The door I had just walked through was no longer there. It had vanished, replaced by walls that seemed to close in around me. The air was suffocating, thick and humid, pressing against my skin. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The whisper echoed again. "You're trapped." My mind was reeling. What was happening? What was this? I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The world around me was twisting, distorting. Everything felt wrong. The walls felt like they were pressing in, closing tighter with every breath. I stumbled backward, my hand reaching out for something to steady myself, but my fingers met nothing. The walls weren't walls anymore. They were just an endless, suffocating void. The mirror still reflected my terrified face. The grin still stretched across the other me's face. And then, with a sudden, violent lurch, the mirror cracked. It wasn't a small crack either. It split right down the middle, shattering the reflection. But the voice didn't stop. "You've already made the choice," it hissed. "You're one of us now." I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet as the room seemed to shift, to bend around me. And that was when I realized it. I wasn't alone. I was never alone. I wasn't even sure I was me anymore. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room was thick, heavy, suffocating. My body was shaking, uncontrollable, as if the very core of me had been rattled to the point of fracture. The crack in the mirror still echoed in my mind, the voice still whispering in the back of my skull. "You've already made the choice. You're one of us now." I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt like it was stretching and folding in on itself, warping. But the moment that cracked mirror shattered, everything went dark. A soundless, deafening silence enveloped me. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My mind was a mess of confusion, a twisted knot of panic and disbelief. It was like I had been thrust into a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. I felt trapped, physically, emotionally, mentally. My chest tightened. I thought I might suffocate right there in that room, my own body betraying me. I finally snapped out of it. My legs moved, stumbling at first like they had a mind of their own. I couldn't feel the floor beneath me, the weight of my body pulling me down, but my feet kept moving, trying to get away, get out, somewhere, anywhere, where I wasn't alone in this hell. I burst through the door, the handle cold under my fingers, but the space I entered felt like another trap. The hallway was the same one I'd walked through 100 times, but it had changed. It felt off. The walls seemed to press in closer, the lights above buzzing louder than before. The walls didn't feel like they were just walls anymore. They felt like they were closing in, like they were watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. The door I had just opened slammed behind me, and the sound echoed down the hallway, somehow more oppressive now. I spun around, the panic rising in my chest, my breath short and ragged. My hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble grabbing the door handle to open it again. But when I finally managed to wrench it open, I was met with the empty, oppressive space of the hallway. No one was there. But then, I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost too soft to hear, but it was there. Like someone was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew it wasn't real, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was there, watching me, following me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to hide, but the air felt like it was pressing down on me, weighing me down, making every movement feel like a struggle. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything I had just witnessed, but nothing added up. The mirror, the voice, the figure in the shadows. Was it real? Had it all been a hallucination, a trick of my mind? But the fear, it was too real to deny. The terror I felt in that moment was enough to convince me that I hadn't imagined it. I stumbled back down the hallway, my mind reeling. I couldn't focus. Everything around me was warped, distorted, like the world was turning on its axis in slow motion. The walls were breathing, the lights flickering with that same eerie rhythm. It was like I wasn't just walking through a building anymore. I was walking through some kind of nightmare, a warped reflection of reality that refused to let go. I have to get out of here. I have to leave. I pushed forward, my hands gripping the walls for support, my steps unsteady. I didn't know where I was going. It didn't matter. I just had to get away. But the deeper I went, the more distorted the hallway became. The length of the corridor seemed endless, stretching far beyond its physical limits, as though it were a tunnel I couldn't escape from. The lights above buzzed louder now, almost deafening, their light flickering in uneven bursts. The air was colder now, so much colder. I could see my breath in front of me, tiny clouds of vapor swirling around me like mist. But it wasn't the cold that had me panicking. Number. It was a sensation creeping up my spine, the feeling of something behind me, just out of sight. My mind told me I was alone, but my heart told me something else, something darker. I felt the weight of eyes on me, invisible eyes that watched me every second, that saw me, studied me, and I couldn't escape. It wasn't just the terror of the unknown anymore. It was the suffocating, overwhelming fear that something was following me, something far worse than I could imagine. I reached the end of the hallway, but there was no exit. Only a door. A single old door at the far end standing ajar. I should have run in the other direction. I should have left, but I felt compelled to move toward it. like I had no other choice. As I approached, I could feel the temperature drop again. It wasn't the chill of the air, it was something else. Something that sent an ice-cold shiver down my spine. I reached for the door, my hand trembling uncontrollably. My body screamed for me to turn away, to run, but I couldn't. I had to know what was on the other side. I had to know what was waiting for me, because I knew, deep down, that if I didn't, it would follow me forever. I pushed the door open, my breath held tight in my chest, my heart pounding so loudly it was all I could hear. And then I saw it. Nothing. The room beyond the door was empty, a hollow, pitch-black space, as empty as the void itself. It was as if the room had no form, no substance, just darkness that stretched into infinity. I stepped forward, and the door slammed shut behind me. No sound, no warning, just a deafening silence that pressed in on me like a weight I couldn't escape. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The darkness swirled, and then, slowly, from the corner of the room, a figure stepped forward. It wasn't like the others. No shadowy outline, no distorted reflection. This one knew me, and I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the unbearable weight of recognition. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with those eyes. My eyes. I tried to move, to scream, but nothing came out. The silence swallowed me whole, and I knew then that I was trapped. I wish I could say I'm free of it now, that I've somehow moved on, found a way to leave it all behind, but I can't. Every night, I close my eyes and it's still there. The cold, the whispers, the shadows that never leave. I see those eyes, my eyes staring back at me, and I know it's not over. Maybe it's never over. Maybe I'm still here, still trapped in that room, and I'm just fooling myself into thinking I've escaped. They said I made a choice, but I didn't. It wasn't mine to make. I don't think any of us ever had a choice. And now, every time I hear a door creak or see a mirror out of the corner of my eye, I wonder what happens next, what they want from me, what they've already taken. I can't escape it, and neither will you. Because once you're part of it, it follows you forever. You're never truly free. It's only just begun.